The Mandalorian has proven to be one of the most universally beloved Star Wars stories in a long time, and Lucasfilm seems to be pivoting their focus to television for the next few years.
Ewan?
Yes?
Are you going to play Obi-Wan Kenobi again?
And though Star Wars Adventures in Babysitting was the first live-action Star Wars show to premiere, it was not the first to be announced. Way back in 2004, rumors out of Lucasfilm indicated that after the completion of the prequel trilogy, George Lucas and his team would begin developing a television series of their own. This was officially confirmed at Star Wars Celebration in 2005.
Then I'm working on a spin-off series. It's not with the main characters, but it's with other characters that have appeared in the series. It'll give you all something to think about. And it's going to be a live-action series, and I think it's a really great idea.
Development on the project finally began in earnest in May of 2007, when artists were brought on board to generate concepts, locations, and characters. This had become standard development procedure for all things Star Wars, starting with The Phantom Menace, but I think it traces its origin back to the very first Star Wars film. Ralph McQuarrie's incomparable renderings of the worlds that Lucas dreamt up played a crucial role in validating Lucas's imagination and selling others on the universe and characters in a way that words could not. From then on, extensive amounts of concept art were used to help inform and inspire the scriptwriting, which in this case began in October 2007. Among the writers brought in to fill out the room, once scripting had started, was Ronald D. Moore.
There he is. He lives here.
He lives in Portland. We have to go to his house. We're going right now. Come on, get in the car.
Known for his work on Star Trek The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Battlestar Galactica. Under George Lucas's guidance, the writers' room brainstormed hundreds of ideas for the show, which would have primarily focused on original characters on the planet of Coruscant during the rise of the Empire between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. All told, that writer's room generated over 50 scripts, spanning stories about the rebels, the Empire, and the scum and villainy of the eponymous Underworld. This was another of Lucas's creative processes. For the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, he and his creative team first outlined more than 70 stories in Indiana Jones's life from 1905 all the way to the time of the feature films. This mass generation of Star Wars content and lore has remained mostly unreleased. However, some elements created for Star Wars Underworld have made their way into subsequent Lucasfilm productions. Among those elements, 79's A Bar for Clone Troopers, which was to have been a central location in Underworld, the concept of a Church of the Force, the character of Saw Gerrera, Empire Day as a mandated holiday,
because today is Empire Day,
and most importantly, Emperor Palpatine's first name. In fact, Sheev Palpatine would have appeared in the series, perhaps only for a single episode or two, but his brief appearance would make an impression. It did just that, even in only scripted form, for Cory Barlog, a video game director who briefly worked at Lucasfilm and was permitted to read some of Underworld's scripts. Barlog said this of the script or scripts featuring Palpatine: "It was the most mind-blowing thing I'd ever experienced. I cared about the Emperor. They made the Emperor a sympathetic figure who was wronged by this fucking heartless woman. She's this hardcore gangster, and she just totally destroyed him as a person. I almost cried while reading this." Although the series was intended to focus on original characters and stories, a few characters from the films were planned to appear. Anthony Daniels had agreed to reprise his role as C-3PO, although it is unclear how big his role would have been. Darth Vader was going to appear, only in a 2-episode arc about an uprising on Coruscant that he would have brutally retaliated against. And finally, Boba Fett would have been the only film character to feature prominently as a major presence in the galaxy's seedy criminal underworld. Reportedly, Daniel Logan, who played young Boba Fett in Attack of the Clones, had been asked to return to the role.
Sure.
Beyond those familiar elements, Star Wars Underworld would have also explored some ancillary characters and concepts from the films, such as Bib Fortuna, Oola, the Papanoida family, based on George Lucas's blue-faced Revenge of the Sith cameo, the Naberries, Padme's family, and the world of pod racing, including a story featuring Thal Jobin, who was briefly the droid's master in the 1980s cartoon series Droids.
Welcome to the racing team of Thal Jobin and Jordan Doucette.
And finally, brainstorming for Star Wars Underworld was when John Knoll made his famous pitch for a story about the rebels who stole the plans to the first Death Star.
And I got thinking about what sort of fun stories you might be able to tell in that episodic format. And I started playing around with this idea, drawn from the opening crawl of 4 of the sort of Mission Impossible style spy mission to steal the Death Star plans. And so I started tinkering around with what the plot structure of something like that might be. And then a day or two later, I was chatting with Rick, and I asked him about the show, and he told me sort of what the era and general subject matter was, and then I realized, well, this idea has no place in that concept.
When Disney purchased Lucasfilm in 2012, Knoll pitched the story again, and it eventually became the basis for the first anthology film, Rogue One. While there were plenty of connections to existing Star Wars canon, the majority of Star Wars Underworld would have focused on brand new concepts and stories. Since the series was set between the prequels and the original trilogy, a lot of the material explored the Empire's tightening grip on the galaxy and the formation of the Rebel Alliance. Again, these topics have been explored in the 2 anthology films and Star Wars Rebels, but under George Lucas's stewardship, the details wouldn't have been the same. There were reportedly stories about the rebels procuring arms, a strong juxtaposition between the organized and rational Mon Mothma and Bail Antilles rebellion versus the more radical Saw Gerrera faction. We would have seen clone troopers age out and be replaced with regular recruits, while the clone troopers dealt with their guilt over the actions they were forced to commit as part of Order 66. Some battle droids that were not deactivated after the end of the war would have been repurposed as a force called the Droid Gatra, controlled by the Crymora Syndicate, a criminal organization operating in Coruscant's underworld. Darth Vader would have reportedly dealt secretly with them while trying to keep the rebellion from spreading. This underworld would be fully fleshed out in the series, and would even tie into another ultimately unreleased project, the Star Wars 1313 video game. According to producer Rick McCallum, the series was going to be filmed primarily on sound stages in Sydney, Australia, using high-definition digital cameras, not unlike those used on the latter 2 prequels. Some test footage was shot in 2010 as a partnership between Lucasfilm and Stargate Studios, a post-production/visual effects studio.
Taking in, hovering, turning. A little faster now, drop in, stay, and car!
As you can see, the footage was shot on a green screen soundstage with almost no physical sets. Impressively though, backgrounds have been created ahead of time and are viewable as real-time rendered footage by camera operators, which eliminates some of the guesswork traditionally associated with digital sets. This technology, while still in its infancy here, was not invented for the project. James Cameron employed a similar system while shooting Avatar a few years earlier, and a version of it would be used on The Mandalorian to lower production costs and eliminate a lot of traditional sets. Again, this is only a demo reel of the technology, not an indication of the series' potential quality or story specifics.
Surveillance droid reports rebel activity in the area. How long have you had these droids? DK-904 reporting in. I think this is as good as new.
So why didn't Star Wars Underworld ever get produced? Put it simply, it was way too expensive. Even with this new way of filming in digital sets, the series was just too cost prohibitive, especially for the scope and ambition that Lucasfilm wanted. These were the kinds of puzzles that Lucas loved to solve though. We were trying to figure out a different way of making movies. We are looking for a different technology that we can use that will make it economically feasible to shoot the show. Right now it looks like the Star Wars features, but we have to figure out how to make it at about 1/10 the cost of the features because it's television. We were working toward that, and we continue to work towards that. We will get there at some point. Lucas hoped to do what he had always done. When his imagination was constrained by the limitations of technology, he simply improved technology. He had done that with the original films, he did it with the prequel trilogy, and he would have figured it out for Underworld if other factors hadn't led to him selling to Disney in 2012. So what will ever become of Star Wars Underworld? That's an area we've spent a lot of time. Reading through the material that he developed is something we would very much like to explore. So our attitude is, we don't want to throw any of that stuff away. It's gold, and it's something we're spending a lot of time looking at, pouring through, discussing, and we may very well develop those things further. We definitely want to. That seems more like lip service than anything else. Lucasfilm and Disney already have a significant slate of Star Wars TV projects announced, and I don't think Underworld fits in there. Realistically, it will probably only ever see the light of day as bits and pieces of lore mined from the scripts and concept art for future Lucasfilm projects. We've already seen that happen, and I think we'll see more of that in the future. But there's something about that I like a lot. It's nice knowing that Lucas's imagination will influence a slew of new Star Wars projects for years or decades to come.